Hey folks, let's talk about something that most people don't understand. A man who chooses to live alone without a girlfriend. Society tells us that happiness comes from relationships, from being surrounded by others, from constantly seeking validation in love. But what if I told you that some of the strongest, most fulfilled men in history thrived in solitude? You see, we live in a world where being single is often viewed as loneliness, where a man living alone is assumed to be missing something. But what if solitude is actually a secret weapon? What if the man who walks alone is actually the one who's most powerful? Think about it. Why do so many men today feel lost, drained, and disconnected from their true purpose? It's because they've been conditioned to believe that their worth is tied to relationships. They chase companionship, they seek external validation, and in doing so, they forget the one relationship that truly matters, the one with themselves. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you sat alone, completely comfortable with your own thoughts, without distractions, without reaching for your phone, without feeling the need to be entertained by someone else? Most men today are afraid of being alone because they've never learned how to truly enjoy their own company. But the truth is, the man who embraces solitude becomes dangerous, not in a reckless way, but in a way that makes him unbreakable. Now let's be clear, this isn't about avoiding relationships, it's about mastering solitude. Because the man who can stand alone, who can find peace in his own company, who isn't afraid of silence, that's the man who becomes untouchable. Look at the greatest minds in history. Marcus Aurelius, Friedrich Nietzsche, Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla. What do they all have in common? They were men who valued solitude. They weren't constantly chasing attention. They weren't seeking validation from others. Instead, they used their time alone to build, to grow, to sharpen their minds, to become something greater than the world expected of them. And yet, society today glorifies distractions. We're told that being single means we're missing out, that being alone means we're not enough. But the truth is, the most powerful men in the world are the ones who aren't desperate for approval, who don't need constant validation. They walk their own path. And because of that, people follow them, not the other way around. So if you're a man who's learning to stand on his own, to be strong in solitude, then you're already ahead of most. By the end of this video, you won't just understand why some men choose to live alone. You'll see why solitude can be the greatest advantage a man can have. Now let me ask you, do you have what it takes to embrace solitude? Drop a comment below and say, I stand alone. Let's get started. Number 1. Why mature men prefer solitude. Hey folks, let's talk about something that makes people uncomfortable, being alone. Society constantly pushes the idea that happiness comes from relationships, from being surrounded by others, from always seeking companionship. But have you ever wondered why the strongest, most disciplined men in history often walked alone? Why do mature men, those who truly understand life, prefer solitude instead of constantly chasing social validation? Most men today fear being alone. They feel uneasy in silence, constantly reaching for their phones, mindlessly scrolling through social media, or surrounding themselves with people just to avoid facing themselves. But here's the truth. Solitude is not loneliness. It's power. When a man learns to enjoy his own company, to sit in silence without craving attention, that's when he truly becomes free. Solitude gives a man something that no relationship, no amount of external validation, and no social approval ever can. Absolute control over his time, his mind, and his emotions. When you don't depend on others for your sense of purpose, you become unshakable. You move with clarity, unaffected by the noise of the world. You don't waste energy on unnecessary drama or distractions. You channel everything into becoming the best version of yourself. Think about the greatest minds in history. Leonardo da Vinci spent years mastering his craft, obsessing over every brushstroke, every invention. He wasn't out chasing relationships. He was building a legacy. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, found his greatest wisdom in solitude. He ruled an empire, but his true strength came from his ability to detach from distractions and focus on what truly mattered. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that solitude wasn't just an option for great men. It was necessary, because only in solitude can a man hear his own thoughts without interference. Yet today, most men run from it. They seek relationships not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being alone with their own thoughts, fear of confronting their insecurities, fear of not being enough without someone else's validation. They jump from one distraction to the next, hoping to fill a void that only they can truly fill. But the mature man understands that solitude isn't about isolation. It's about transformation. The man who chooses to be alone isn't suffering. He's evolving. He's refining his thoughts, strengthening his mind, and sharpening his purpose. He is the man who builds, who creates, who leads. While others waste time chasing fleeting connections, he is mastering himself. He doesn't need constant validation, and ironically, that's what makes people drawn to him. And here's something most people won't tell you. The moment you embrace solitude, the moment you become completely self-sufficient, something shifts. You stop chasing, and the world starts paying attention. You become the kind of man who isn't desperate for attention. And that's what makes people curious about you. You develop a quiet confidence that can't be faked. You no longer rely on external validation because you've already validated yourself. Most men will never reach this level of self-mastery. They will always look for something outside of themselves to complete them. But if you can sit alone, if you can be content in your own presence, if you can turn solitude into your greatest weapon, you become untouchable. Are you that kind of man? Or are you still running from yourself? If you're ready to embrace solitude, drop this in the comments. I stand unshaken. And if you're serious about mastering this mindset, subscribe now and join a community of men who refuse to live life on anyone else's terms. This is just the beginning. Number 2, the mindset of independent living. Hey folks, let's talk about something that most people get completely wrong. What it really means to be independent. See, a lot of guys think independence is just about paying your bills, living alone, and not relying on anyone financially. But that's not real independence. That's just the surface level. True independence starts in your mind. It's about being so mentally and emotionally self-sufficient that no situation, no person, and no setback can shake you. The reason so many men today feel lost is because they've built their entire identity around external validation. They chase relationships, approval, and attention, not because they truly need those things, but because they're afraid of what happens when they're left alone with their own thoughts. And that's the problem. Most people don't actually live independently. They just survive in an illusion of self-sufficiency while constantly craving someone or something to lean on. But here's the truth. The man who embraces independent living doesn't seek completion. He already is complete. He doesn't feel lost when people walk away. He doesn't crumble when life throws challenges at him. He understands that at the end of the day, the only person he can truly rely on is himself. Think about some of the greatest minds in history. Henry David Thoreau spent years living in complete solitude, writing Walden, a book that changed the way we understand self-reliance. He didn't waste his time chasing relationships that weren't aligned with his vision. He focused on himself, his growth, and his craft. Then there's Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest inventors of all time. The man lived most of his life alone, not because he had to, but because he knew that his purpose was greater than fitting into society's expectations. He wasn't looking for distractions. He was building something bigger than himself. That's the kind of mindset that separates strong men from weak men. Most guys today live in fear of solitude. They jump from one relationship to the next, one social circle to another, constantly trying to avoid that uncomfortable silence. But here's what they don't realize. Solitude is where real transformation happens. When you stop filling every empty moment with distractions, you actually start to hear yourself. You start to understand who you are, what you want, and what actually matters. Living independently isn't just about physical freedom. It's about mental freedom. It's about knowing that you don't need anyone else to feel whole. It's about moving through life with certainty, not second-guessing yourself, not explaining your choices to people who don't understand, and not tolerating anything that doesn't align with your vision. And the best part? When you stop needing people, they start noticing you more. Why? Because the man who is completely self-reliant carries an aura of power. He's the guy who doesn't have to prove himself, because his presence alone commands respect. He's not chasing attention, and that's exactly why people are drawn to him. Picture two men walking into a room. One is constantly looking around, checking his phone, adjusting his posture, trying to make himself seem more likable. The other walks in, focused, grounded, completely indifferent to whether people notice him or not. Who do you think is more attractive? More respected? More powerful? It's always the man who owns his space without needing to be validated. But let's get one thing clear. This isn't about isolation. Independent living doesn't mean cutting people off completely. It means having the strength to stand alone, so that when you do let people into your life, it's by choice, not out of need. A man who embraces independent living doesn't settle. He doesn't waste energy on meaningless drama, toxic relationships, or superficial validation. He walks through life knowing that if people stay, great. If they leave, great. He remains solid either way. So let me ask you, are you truly independent, or are you still waiting for someone else to define your worth? If you're ready to own your solitude and build an unshakable mindset, drop this in the comments. I control my own path. And if you're serious about developing this mindset, subscribe now and join a community of men who refuse to live on anyone else's terms. There's something even more powerful waiting for you in the next part. Stay with me. Number 3. The power of self-reliance. Hey folks, let's talk about something that separates the strong from the weak. Self-reliance. In a world where everyone is constantly looking for support, validation, and reassurance, being self-reliant is one of the rarest and most powerful traits a man can develop. Most people can't function without external support. They rely on relationships, social circles, and constant approval to feel secure. But the moment you become truly self-reliant, you stop needing the world to hold your hand. And that changes everything. The average person today has been programmed to believe that they need someone else to feel complete. They believe that life is about depending on others, on friends, on family, on a romantic partner to get through difficulties. And while having people in your corner is great, the problem starts when you can't function without them. Look at society. The moment something goes wrong, most people run to someone else for comfort instead of facing the situation head-on. They don't know how to handle their own emotions, how to solve their own problems, or how to push forward without someone cheering them on. They're completely dependent, and dependence is weakness. But here's the truth. No one is coming to save you. No one is responsible for your success, your happiness, or your peace of mind. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you start building real power. Because the man who is self-reliant doesn't panic when things go wrong. He doesn't crumble when people leave. He doesn't get lost when life gets tough. He knows how to handle himself, no matter the situation. Look at some of the greatest figures in history. Theodore Roosevelt, Marcus Aurelius, and Elon Musk. These men understood that if you want something, you have to take full responsibility for making it happen. Roosevelt built his strength by pushing himself into uncomfortable situations, refusing to rely on anyone to make him strong. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the emperor of Rome, didn't depend on others to guide him. He relied on his own wisdom and discipline. Elon Musk, no matter how many setbacks he's faced, never waits for someone to fix his problems. He solves them himself. That's what self-reliance is about. It's about knowing that, at the end of the day, you're the only person you can fully count on. No one else will fight your battles for you. No one else will make sure you succeed. No one else will build the life you want. That's your job. So how do you develop self-reliance? It starts with one thing: owning everything in your life. That means no blaming, no complaining, no waiting for someone to help you. When something goes wrong, you don't make excuses, you figure it out. When you face challenges, you don't wait for support. You push through on your own. When you have a goal, you don't depend on others to motivate you. You show up every day and put in the work. And let's be real, this is not easy. It's uncomfortable. It forces you to take full control of your life instead of hoping someone else will. But that's exactly why most people will never be truly powerful. Because power requires responsibility. And responsibility requires self-reliance. The moment you stop looking for someone to hold your hand, the moment you stop expecting others to make things easier for you, the moment you fully accept that you are in control of everything in your life, that's the moment you become truly unstoppable. Because when you rely on no one but yourself, you gain a level of confidence and strength that is impossible to break. Think about this. How many times have you heard someone say, "I can't do this because I don't have support," or "I would succeed if I had someone to help me"? That's the mindset of weak men. Strong men don't wait for help. They don't sit around hoping for a lucky break. They take action, they take risks, and they take full responsibility for everything they do. Self-reliance is what makes a man dangerous, because when you don't need anything from anyone, you can't be manipulated, controlled, or broken. You become the kind of man that others respect because they see that you are solid on your own. And when people see that you don't need them, that's when they start chasing after you. So ask yourself this: are you truly self-reliant, or are you still waiting for someone to save you? If you're ready to own your life and become unbreakable, drop this in the comments: "I rely on no one." And if you're serious about building this level of strength, subscribe now and join a community of men who refuse to depend on anyone but themselves. Something powerful is coming next. Stay with me. Number 4. Overcoming loneliness and social expectations. Hey folks, let's be real. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Society keeps pushing the idea that if you're not constantly surrounded by people, something must be wrong with you. That if you're single, if you enjoy solitude, if you choose to live life on your own terms, then you're somehow incomplete. But here's the thing. Being alone isn't the problem. The problem is thinking that being alone is a problem. Most men are not actually lonely. What they feel is the pressure to not be alone. You turn on the TV and you see characters in happy relationships. You scroll through social media and it's filled with couples and people flexing their social lives. Your family asks, "When are you settling down?" Your friends say, "Come on, man, you need to get out more." And suddenly you start thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm missing out. But are you? Look around. How many people do you know who followed the script? Got into relationships because they felt they had to, surrounded themselves with people just to avoid being alone, only to end up miserable? The truth is, most people aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of what others will think if they are. And that's the trap. It's the fear of judgment that keeps people in situations they don't even want to be in. It's what makes men stay in toxic relationships just so they're not single. It's what makes people fill their time with empty social interactions instead of focusing on things that actually matter. It's why so many men settle for a life that doesn't even make them happy, because they think being alone is worse than being unfulfilled. But that's a lie. Being alone is powerful. When you embrace solitude, you gain something that most people will never have: complete control over your life. You're no longer living to meet other people's expectations. You're not making decisions based on pressure. You're not afraid of silence. And that makes you dangerous in the best way possible. Think about the strongest men in history, the ones who led, who built, who changed the world. They weren't spending their time chasing social approval. They weren't worried about what people thought of them. They were focused. They were disciplined. They were self-sufficient. Look at Buddha, who walked away from everything to find truth in solitude. Look at Leonardo da Vinci, who dedicated his life to mastering his craft. Look at Nikola Tesla, who understood that his work was more important than fitting into social norms. These men didn't fear being alone. They used it. The reason most people struggle with loneliness isn't because they lack company. It's because they've never learned to enjoy their own presence. They haven't built a life they actually love living. They don't have passions, goals, or a sense of purpose. They're bored with themselves. And that's why they constantly seek distractions. Mindless entertainment, meaningless relationships, endless scrolling, anything to avoid being alone with their thoughts. But when you build a life that excites you, solitude stops feeling like a punishment. You have to start seeing solitude as an opportunity. It's the time when you grow, when you develop skills, when you sharpen your mind. It's when you build the kind of discipline and focus that separates strong men from weak men. And the crazy part? The moment you stop chasing social validation, people start respecting you more. They start wondering what makes you so different, so grounded, so unbothered. And that's because they see something in you that they wish they had: complete independence. People are always going to have opinions. They're always going to question why you don't follow the crowd. They're going to say you're missing out. But what exactly are you missing out on? Drama, fake connections, a life that doesn't even feel like yours? No, thanks. The real loss isn't choosing to be alone. The real loss is wasting your life trying to impress people who don't even matter. So ask yourself, are you afraid of being alone, or are you afraid of what people will say about it? Because the moment you stop caring about opinions, the moment you decide that your life is yours to live, that's when you become truly free. If you're ready to break free from social expectations, drop this in the comments. I live life on my terms. And if you're serious about mastering this mindset, subscribe now and join a community of men who refuse to let society dictate their worth. Something powerful is coming next. Stay with me. Number 5. Stories of men thriving alone. Hey folks, let's talk about something that most people don't understand. Some of the most powerful men in history chose solitude, not because they had to, but because they understood that being alone isn't a weakness. It's an advantage. The world constantly pushes the idea that you need someone else to feel complete, that a man who lives alone is somehow missing out. But when you look at the stories of men who thrived in solitude, you realize that the opposite is true. Let's start with Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest inventors of all time. Tesla never married, never pursued a traditional family life, and instead he dedicated himself to his work. He wasn't lonely, he was focused. While other men were wasting time chasing validation, he was revolutionizing electricity, engineering, and technology. And what happened? Decades later, his name is still remembered, while the men who criticized him for being alone have been forgotten. Then there's Leonardo da Vinci, a man who could have easily filled his life with distractions, but chose to stay deeply committed to his craft. He didn't spend his days trying to fit in, trying to conform, or trying to impress society. He spent them learning, inventing, and creating masterpieces that would outlive him. If he had followed the crowd, would we still be talking about him today? Probably not. Or take Buddha, who left behind his comfortable royal life to embrace solitude and self-discovery. He understood that real wisdom, real transformation, doesn't come from constant social interaction. It comes from deep reflection. He stepped away from the noise of the world and found enlightenment. His teachings still impact millions today, long after he walked the earth. And let's not forget Henry David Thoreau, the writer and philosopher who spent years living in a small cabin in the woods, away from distractions. He wasn't running from the world. He was understanding it on a deeper level. His writings on self-reliance and simple living are still influencing people to this day. The pattern is clear. Men who embraced solitude became legends. Not because they were antisocial, not because they couldn't be around people, but because they had bigger things to focus on. They weren't afraid of being alone because they knew that solitude wasn't empty. It was full of potential. Now, some people might say, but those are extreme cases. Not everyone wants to be a famous inventor, artist, or philosopher. And that's fair. But thriving alone isn't about becoming famous. It's about mastering your own life on your own terms. Look around you today. There are men quietly building their lives, traveling the world solo, starting businesses, writing books, mastering skills, all without needing constant social validation. These men aren't miserable. They aren't lost. They're fully in control. Think about the guy who hits the gym alone every day. No need for a training partner or group motivation. He's building his strength for himself. Think about the man who packs a bag, buys a one-way ticket, and explores the world alone, experiencing life without waiting for company. He's expanding his mind, his perspective, his independence. Think about the guy who spends his nights working on his craft, coding, writing, creating, while others are out chasing meaningless social interactions. That's the man who's going to win in the long run. The key to thriving alone is having a mission. The men who struggle with solitude are the ones who don't have a purpose. They sit in silence and feel empty because they've never built a life they actually enjoy. But when you have something you're working toward, being alone doesn't feel lonely. It feels necessary. And let's be honest, most of the people who judge men for living alone are the same ones stuck in situations they don't even enjoy. They criticize solitude because they're afraid of it themselves. They can't imagine being alone because they rely on distractions to avoid dealing with their own thoughts. They don't respect solitude because they've never experienced the power that comes with it. But you don't have to live like them. You can choose to see solitude for what it really is, a tool for growth, focus, and freedom. So let me ask you, are you afraid of being alone, or are you afraid of what others will say about it? Because the men who thrive alone don't just survive without social validation, they excel without it. If you're ready to own your solitude and build a life that's yours, drop this in the comments. I thrive alone. And if you're serious about mastering this mindset, subscribe now and join a community of men who refuse to follow the crowd. The next part is going to challenge everything you thought you knew. Stay with me. Number 6, developing inner strength through solitude. Hey folks, let's talk about something that separates strong men from the rest. Inner strength. In a world where distractions are everywhere, where people avoid being alone at all costs, the ability to thrive in solitude isn't just rare, it's powerful. Most people think solitude is about isolation, about cutting yourself off from the world. But real solitude? It's about becoming unshakable. Think about it. When you strip away the noise, the social pressure, the constant need for validation, what's left? You. And most people are terrified of that. They avoid being alone because, deep down, they don't like who they are. They drown themselves in entertainment, relationships, and mindless scrolling just to avoid facing their own thoughts. But here's the truth. You can't develop real strength if you're always running from yourself. When you embrace solitude, you're not just spending time alone. You're training your mind. You're building the kind of mental toughness that makes you immune to emotional chaos. You're learning how to rely on yourself, how to solve problems without needing reassurance, how to face challenges without crumbling. That's what makes a man truly strong. Not how many people he has around him, but how well he stands when he's completely on his own. Look at history. The most powerful men, the thinkers, the warriors, the leaders, they all understood this. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, spent hours in solitude, reflecting on his own thoughts, mastering his emotions. Bruce Lee trained alone, not just physically, but mentally, developing a level of focus that made him untouchable. Even modern-day leaders like Elon Musk take time away from distractions to think, strategize, and plan at a level most people can't even comprehend. These men weren't afraid of solitude. They used it as a tool for greatness. But let's bring it closer to home. Have you ever noticed how the strongest people you know, the ones who never seem shaken, who don't get desperate for attention, who always seem in control, are the ones who are comfortable being alone? That's not an accident. That's inner strength. Because here's what happens when you truly embrace solitude. First, you become emotionally stable. When you're always around people, you absorb their emotions, their opinions, their energy. But when you spend time alone, you start to recognize which thoughts are actually yours. You develop control over your own mind instead of reacting to everything around you. Second, you build unbreakable confidence. Most people rely on external validation. They need someone to tell them they're doing well, that they're worth something. But a man who thrives in solitude, he doesn't need applause. His confidence comes from within. He knows what he's worth because he's put in the work to become strong. Third, you learn how to solve your own problems. People who always rely on others never develop real problem-solving skills. The moment they face a challenge, they panic, they complain, they look for someone to fix it for them. But a man who has spent time alone with his thoughts knows how to navigate difficulties. He doesn't wait for someone to save him. He saves himself. Now, some people will tell you, but humans are social creatures. We're not meant to be alone. And sure, we all need connection. But there's a difference between choosing connection and being dependent on it. The strongest men don't avoid people. They simply don't need them to feel complete. And that's a huge difference. Think about this. How often do you hear someone say, "I just need to be around people, or I'll go crazy"? That's not a sign of strength. That's a sign of dependence. That's someone who hasn't built enough inner stability to be alone with themselves. But you have a choice. You can either be like the majority, constantly seeking distraction, avoiding solitude, staying weak. Or you can use solitude to become dangerous in the best way possible. Mentally sharp, emotionally resilient, completely in control. So let me ask you, are you comfortable in your own company, or are you still running from yourself? If you're serious about developing unshakable inner strength, drop this in the comments. I master myself. And if you're ready to take this even further, subscribe now and join a community of men who refuse to be controlled by weakness. Something powerful is coming next. Stay with me. Number 7. Personal growth and fulfillment in solitude. Hey folks, let's talk about something that most people completely misunderstand: personal growth in solitude. The world keeps telling you that happiness, success, and fulfillment come from external things. That if you're not constantly surrounded by people, if you're not in a relationship, if you're not out socializing every weekend, then you're somehow failing at life. But let me tell you something. Some of the most powerful transformations happen in complete solitude. When you're alone, there's no noise, no distractions, no outside opinions telling you who you should be. It's just you, your thoughts, and the opportunity to become the best version of yourself. But the problem? Most people fear that silence. They don't know what to do with themselves when the distractions are gone. They feel restless, uncomfortable, even anxious. And that's because they've never taken the time to actually know themselves. You see, solitude isn't about being isolated. It's about having the space to grow without interference. Take a look at any great man in history, and you'll notice a pattern. They all had periods of deep solitude. They weren't wasting time chasing validation. They weren't constantly looking for approval. They were locked in, focused, building themselves into something unstoppable. Think about Michael Jordan. The man wasn't just talented, he was obsessed with his craft. While others were partying, relaxing, seeking attention, he was in the gym. He was studying the game, training harder than anyone else. It wasn't luck that made him a legend. It was his ability to block out distractions and focus relentlessly on growth. Or take Albert Einstein. Do you think he was out every night looking for social validation? No. He was alone with his thoughts, questioning everything, thinking on a level most people couldn't comprehend. That's why his name is still known today, while millions of others who lived in his time are forgotten. And then there's Buddha, who literally walked away from everything, his wealth, his royal status, his entire way of life, to sit alone and seek enlightenment. He understood that true fulfillment wasn't found in chasing pleasure or avoiding pain, but in mastering the mind. The point is, solitude isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. It's where you break free from the expectations of others. It's where you develop absolute clarity about who you are and what you want. It's where you sharpen your discipline, build your confidence, and create a level of self-reliance that most people will never have. But here's the thing. Most men waste their solitude. They use it as an excuse to procrastinate, to binge-watch content, to scroll endlessly through social media, numbing themselves instead of using that time to build something real. If you're alone and you're not growing, then you're just existing. And that's not what solitude is about. When you truly embrace being alone, you stop depending on external sources for fulfillment. You start realizing that happiness isn't found in relationships, status, or material things. It's found in progress. When you're alone, you can take complete ownership of your life. No excuses, no blaming others, just raw, unfiltered accountability. A man who thrives in solitude doesn't need distractions. He's not looking for approval. He's too busy elevating himself, refining his skills, pushing his limits, and setting himself apart from the crowd. And ironically, that's what makes him magnetic. That's what makes people admire him, respect him, and even chase after him. Not because he's seeking attention, but because he doesn't need it. The world respects a man who is self-sufficient. A man who doesn't rely on others for his happiness. A man who is comfortable in his own presence, who values his time, who uses every second to sharpen his mind and body instead of wasting it on meaningless distractions. That's the kind of man who wins in the long run. So ask yourself, are you using your solitude to grow, or are you just passing the time? Because the men who truly embrace solitude are the ones who come out stronger, smarter, and more powerful than ever before. If you're committed to personal growth, drop this in the comments. I grow in silence. And if you're serious about mastering this mindset, subscribe now and become part of a community of men who refuse to be average. The next part is going to challenge everything you think you know. Stay with me. Number 8. Living with purpose and clarity. Hey folks, let's talk about something that separates men who thrive from those who merely survive. Purpose and clarity. If you've ever felt like you're just going through the motions, waking up each day without a clear sense of direction, then this is for you. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much success, money, or status you have. If you don't have purpose, you're drifting. Most people live their entire lives without truly knowing what they're working toward. They let the world decide for them. They follow the blueprint society gives them. Go to school, get a job, make money, find a partner, retire, and then what? They spend decades chasing things they were told would make them happy, only to realize they still feel empty. And that's because happiness doesn't come from external achievements. It comes from knowing exactly why you're doing what you're doing. Think about it. The most disciplined, unstoppable men in history weren't just going with the flow. They had a clear mission, a vision so strong that nothing could distract them. Look at Leonardo da Vinci. The man didn't just dabble in art, science, and engineering. He was obsessed with pushing the limits of human potential. His curiosity wasn't random, it was driven by purpose. And that's why his name still carries weight today. Or take Michael Jordan, a man who didn't just play basketball, but lived and breathed competition. He wasn't just trying to win games, he was building a legacy, proving he was the greatest to ever step on the court. And every action he took, every sacrifice he made, was guided by that purpose. The question is, what's guiding you? Most men never ask themselves this. They drift through life, thinking that one day they'll figure it out, but without direction, they end up going nowhere. They waste time on meaningless distractions, pouring energy into things that don't matter, and then wonder why they feel lost. But a man with purpose? He doesn't waste time. He's locked in, he's focused, he's constantly moving forward because he knows where he's going. So how do you find that kind of clarity? How do you break free from drifting and start living with intention? It starts with eliminating the distractions that cloud your judgment. Most men never get a clear vision for their life because they're too busy drowning in noise. Social media, pointless entertainment, toxic relationships, mindless routines. They never give themselves the space to think. That's why solitude is so powerful. When you step away from the noise, you finally have the time to ask yourself the right questions. What do I want to build? What do I want to leave behind? What will my life stand for? And once you have an answer, even if it's just a small one, you commit to it. You stop hesitating. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You start moving. Because here's the truth. Purpose isn't found, it's created. It's built through action, through discipline, through waking up every day and moving forward, even when you don't feel like it. A man who waits around for clarity will never get it. But a man who takes action will eventually create the clarity he's looking for. And once you have that, everything changes. You stop chasing people who don't respect you because you're too busy chasing your mission. You stop wasting time on meaningless things because you understand that every second counts. You stop worrying about what others think because you're working on something bigger than their opinions. And here's the thing. Most people won't understand. They'll call you obsessed. They'll say you're too intense, that you need to relax. But those same people, they're the ones who will look at your life years from now, wishing they had done what you did. Because when a man has clarity, when he has purpose, when he knows exactly what he's working toward, he becomes unstoppable. That's the kind of man who builds legacies. The kind of man who never wakes up feeling lost. The kind of man who doesn't settle for average because he's too busy building something extraordinary. So ask yourself, are you truly living with purpose, or are you just passing the time? Because the men who figure this out don't just survive, they dominate. All right, folks, if there's one thing to take away from this, it's that living with purpose isn't optional. It's the difference between existing and truly living. Most people drift, waiting for clarity to magically appear. But the ones who build their own path, they're the ones who thrive. So ask yourself, are you leading your life, or is life leading you? If you're serious about taking control, about living with intention, clarity, and purpose, Then make sure you subscribe and join a community of men who refuse to be average. And if this message hit home, drop this in the comments. I choose purpose. That's it for today, but remember, your next move determines everything. Make it count.